Hey, kennysart here. The summer of 1966, after I graduated from high school, my brother, a friend of his, Jim Bunch, and myself went for a trip on the Yukon River in kayaks. The trip from Eugene had been tiring. There was bad weather, long dusty roads, sleepless nights, but we arrived in Whitehouse, Canada at about 1:30 a.m. in the morning, July 11th, 1966. We asked around town a place to store the pickup truck we drove up here in. A standard station agreed to take care of it for $10 a month. There isn't a public boat landing in Whitehouse, so we ended up backing the pickup down to the river and launching our boats right by two old stern wheelers, the Casa and the Whitehouse. It took us about 4 hours to unpack the boats and put them together and load up our gear. Jim Bunch was the first one to launch with our dog Meg. That's me on the right there. My brother James had brought along a 16mm movie camera that was a wind-up, and he had anticipated taking movies of our whole trip. Both Jim Bunch and myself brought along still cameras, and we also took photographs. It hardly seemed possible that I was really up here. Just a few weeks ago I was sitting at a desk in high school. Now I'm paddling on the Yukon River. We paddled along for a while, but then we soon decided it was easier just to drift with the current. We just sat back and enjoyed the scenery. We noticed that in the steep sandbanks, swallows had dug holes and built their nests inside them. They were nested in colonies of several hundred, and a whole hillside would be peppered with holes. Now we know where all the swallows go. We drifted and paddled off and on the rest of the day until we reached the head of Lake LaBarge, where we made camp on a sandbar. It took us a while to get stuff out of our boats since we didn't know where anything really was yet. It was well past 1 p.m. when we finally had finished and rolled out the sleeping bags. It takes a bit longer to do things when you're not organized, and we weren't. Meg sure was excited. She really liked to fetch the stick. The never-ending sunlight was amazing. July 12th. The second day. Today is Jim Bunch's 21st birthday. James made him a big pancake for breakfast. Today we have to cross Lake LaBarge. 32 miles of still water, no current here. We got the idea of rigging up a makeshift sail. The wind didn't last long. We paddled and paddled. 13 hours of paddling. 3 very tired people at the other end. July 13th, the third day. Talk about terrific fishing. Today we stumbled across something really exciting. We paddled up a slough and noticed some big fish swimming around. Got our poles out, cast out a lure. As soon as it hit the water, a fish rushed over and grabbed it. Line would go ripping off the reel. We lost the first few. The line would break. Jim Bunch, after 10 minutes of fighting a fish, was finally able to land a large 22-inch fish. We weren't sure, but it was either a muskie or a pike. We lost more, but eventually landed 3 and had fish for dinner that night. It was good. July 14th, 4th day. We stopped at the junction of the Teslin River and the Yukon River and looked over some cabins. They were pretty dilapidated and rotten, except for one that had been fixed up for travelers to use. We caught more fish today and saw our first moose along the river. It wasn't really big, but it had antlers that still had the velvet on them. The Yukon River isn't as wide below the lake as it was above the lake. We stopped and visited several other abandoned cabins along the way. The weather was holding up well, and this is indeed the land of the midnight sun. It seemed like the sun never actually went down, just dipped below the horizon and came right back up. July 15th, the 5th day. We saw more moose today and 2 beavers shortly after reaching the Big Salmon River. The settlement of Big Salmon looked like it had been abandoned for a long time. Everything was grown up and dilapidated looking. We found a cemetery there with little tiny houses. We spent the afternoon drifting down the river talking about hamburgers and root beer floats. Day 16, the 6th day. We stopped at the village of Carmacks and visited the local hotel and restaurant and bought some candy. Funny the kind of food you think about. July 17th, the 7th day. The only rapids on the Yukon River that we will be running with our boats. This was a trouble spot for the stern wheel paddle boats that used to run the Yukon River in the past. Five Finger Rapids gets its name because there's 5 different channels that go through these big rocks that are jutting out of the river. We had gone ashore and climbed up on a hill overlooking the river to check out the rapids to see which would be the best way to go through this. We did have some concern about going through this part of the river. Jim Bunch was the first one to go through. James and I soon followed in our kayak. It wasn't as bad as we expected, though. Nobody tipped over and we really didn't get that wet. We actually got wetter on some rapids that we encountered a little ways down the river from Five Fingers Rapids. We didn't expect them and we weren't really fully prepared for that. We didn't know at the time, but the best channel is really on the east side of the river. Of course, we went through on the west side. July 18th, the 8th day. We had some of the biggest pancakes ever made for breakfast, topped with applesauce. That is not a stack of pancakes, that is one pancake. We always camped on islands because we were concerned about bears. The morning started cloudy and continued to get worse. The cloudy day turned into a wet nightmare. We were very happy to get to the next settlement, Fort Selkirk. Very wet. July 19th, the 9th day. We had spent the night in the old schoolhouse. There was one resident of Fort Selkirk. His name was Denny. Denny was the caretaker and the Canadian government had made it a historical place. We talked to several other travelers here, 2 in a boat and 1 in a rubber raft. Today we walked around Fort Selkirk and admired the old buildings. You might have heard about this place from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. But at this point we were taking the opportunity to rest and reorganize our stuff. We spent one more night in the schoolhouse at Fort Selkirk. July 20th, the 10th day. We woke up about noon. It was a beautiful day, sun shining, no wind, no mosquitoes. 6 p.m. rolled around before we finally shoved off from Fort Selkirk. It was nice to get back on the river, feeling warm and dry again. We sighted a bear and more bears. The next couple of days we actually saw a lot of bears and moose. Having issues with bears was really our biggest concern up here, so every time we camped, we always camped on an island out in the middle of the river. This bear had a couple of cubs. That was the main reason that we had our dog along with us, Meg, to warn us of bears. It would have been nice if we would have had better telephoto equipment for our cameras and stuff, but we didn't, so our animal pictures aren't that great. And we really weren't that anxious to have the bears come close enough to get really good pictures. Keep your distance, please. July 21st, 11th day. Here's a painting that I made a few years later based on this photograph. I sold it on eBay. The White River joins the Yukon River in this area, and it is aptly named. It is very, very muddy. It has glacial silt in it. It turns the Yukon into a very muddy river. July 23rd, 13th day. It rained a little bit last night and it's still sprinkling some this morning. There is a lot of smoke in the air today. Here's another painting I made a few years later. The midnight sun on a smoky day. July 24th, the 14th day. We were approaching Dawson and you could see on the horizon there's this huge smoke plume. There were some major forest fires in the area. Around 6 p.m. we rounded a bend in the river and saw Dawson. Dawson is that city in the Yukon territories where there was a huge gold strike in the 1890s. We weren't here for the gold, but we did go to a restaurant called the Floridora and had hamburgers and milkshakes. There was a lot of activity on the river. There were airplanes coming and going, taking firefighters to the fires and back. July 25th, the 15th day. We stocked up on groceries and left Dawson in the early afternoon. July 26th, the 16th day. July 27th, the 17th day. This is the small settlement of 40 Mile. It's another place the Canadian government was planning on restoring historically. We didn't see anybody here this day, but we did walk around and look at some things. The 40 Mile River comes in right here and it's nice clear water, so we thought maybe we'd do our laundry. Here you can see the difference between the clear 40 Mile water and the Yukon water. Time for a swim and some laundry. Nothing like good cold water for a bath. Our makeshift clothesline that Meg later knocked over. July 29th, 19th day. We are now in Alaska. We crossed the border from Canada into Alaska yesterday. Jim Bunch is trying to strike it rich by panning for some gold in a gravel bar where we were camped. No, he didn't find anything. It was fun though. One of our typical camps on an island in the river. See the short guy standing in front? July 30th, 20th day. Jim Bunch tries his hand at some more gold panning. I think he did find a few flakes. I brought my paint stuff along with me, so I thought I'd try painting a picture. Here's another picture that I painted many years later of the picture I was painting a picture. I painted 2 pictures that day. Wow, I still had hair on top of my head way back then. July 31st, 21st day. I was trying to light matches with my .22 rifle. I wasn't successful. Last night a spark popped out of the fire pit and burned a hole in my sleeping bag. Luckily I was able to patch it up. There was still quite a lot of smoke from the forest fires in the air on the horizon. Jim trying some more gold panning. Meg chasing rocks. The mosquitoes were really bad today. August 1st, the 22nd day. Every night we utilized our paddles from the kayaks and a tarp to make a makeshift tent to sleep under. It worked quite well actually and was very easy to make. However, it doesn't provide much bear protection and certainly no mosquito protection. August 3rd, the 24th day on the river. To me, this rock looked like a locomotive. Since the Yukon was so muddy you couldn't really use water out of it, so Jim Bunch and I decided to paddle across the Yukon from an island we were camped on to go to a creek over there and get some fresh water. It was a tough paddle because we had to go upstream to get over to where the creek was. Nothing like paddling a couple of miles just to go a few hundred feet. It certainly was agreeable that floating downriver was a lot easier. But we did get our fresh water. August 4th, the 25th day. We drifted past a Indian village where we saw a fish wheel in operation. Salmon tend to travel up the river along near the bank, so these fish wheels rotate with a big net on one side of it, and the salmon get scooped up and then slide off into a bin. Pretty ingenious. We stopped at this small town of Eagle and went to the post office and picked up some general delivery mail for us from home. It looks like the traditional Indian way of curing salmon up there in the Yukon is to hang it up on racks, dry it in the sun. And there is plenty of sunshine, almost 24 hours a day. We drifted on down the Yukon River, past an interesting rock formation. We had some fun listening to our echoes here. Saw another moose along the shore. She had a young calf with her. And a bear that tried to escape us by climbing up a very steep hill. The midnight sun in Alaska. "26 days on the Yukon River, 2 kayaks, 3 people, and 1 dog. We ended our trip in Circle City, Alaska. Circle City, Alaska, the end of the road, the farthest point you can drive in the United States north. It's 100 miles from the Arctic Circle. At least in 1966, the farthest point north you can drive. Some of the residents of Circle City panning for gold on the Yukon River. We camped at Circle City. James and Jim hitchhiked back to Whitehouse to get our truck. That took 3 days while I stayed behind and watched over our stuff. Then we drove back down the Alaskan highway, headed back towards home. In 1966, the Alaskan highway, or the Alcan highway, was still a gravel road. Our truck suffered a broken windshield when a rock flew up from another vehicle and hit right in the middle. Bam! On the second day on the way back home, Meg woke us up. She had treed a bear that had come into our camp. This is the very reason that we had Meg along with us. Not a very happy bear. But at least we were safe. The bear was on a telephone pole. After a while, we pulled Meg away and the bear climbed down, and then Meg treed it in a tree. The bear looked a lot more comfortable up in the tree. And being as adventurous as we were, and probably not too smart, each of us, one at a time, climbed up the tree and took close-up pictures of the bear. I'm sure the bear was thinking, why don't these people just leave me alone and go away? Meg was having a great time, but the bear wasn't going anywhere. Jim Bunch's turn to climb up the tree and say hi. Probably not too safe, but it seemed alright at the time. Now the bear is just starting to look bored. My turn to climb up the tree. Click, pictures taken. Eventually we all grew tired of this game and moved away from the tree so the bear could leave. We did make it back home to Eugene, but not before we had some mechanical difficulties with the truck and it had to be towed down from Portland because the rear end went out on it. And one of the tires went flat after we got home. It was a tired truck. Jim Bunch polishing up his Porsche. For me, being only 18 years old and just graduating from high school, this was quite an adventure. An adventure of a lifetime. Something to remember. All three of us had something to remember. It was great fun. Everyone needs to do things like this. James was able to get a replacement rear end for the truck from the junkyard and we put it back together. I hope you have enjoyed watching my video. If so, leave a comment. Thanks for watching. See you around.